Greetings, people of Earth. I have returned across time and space, having lost my apartment and thus having floated in the ether for a few weeks, hence my silence. But I'm back in a friend's apartment. I'll be moving around for a few days once again, but I'm still making these videos because life is good, and so's today's movie, which is The Silence of Dr. Ivans, or Dr. Evans, depending on the translation. It's a Soviet movie from 1973, directed by Budimir Metalnikov. He also wrote the screenplay. What's the story? Well, there's this plane crash. It's a Western plane. Everybody on board is from the West. One of the passengers is Dr. Ivans and his wife. Dr. Ivans is a specialist on longevity. His life's work is making people live longer. However, he's very much afraid that they're all going to die any minute now, but they do survive, a few people at least, including Dr. Ivans and his wife. Many very strange things are happening, and what we discover is that they have been saved by aliens. Dr. Ivans eventually enters into contact with these aliens. He acts as an ambassador for humanity, and the good news is that the aliens are super friendly. They've crossed the galaxy to meet other human beings, looking for human beings, and the first place they found any is on Earth. I say aliens, but there are two races. One of the races is just like us. They are humans, except they evolved on another planet, and the other, I forget the name, Eos or something like that, and they are very different, non-humanoid, very strange, kind of like the eye creature from It Came From Outer Space. Very odd looking, almost a Lovecraftian creature. And it turns out that these two races from across the universe have created this sort of peaceful federation, and they live in peace and harmony, and this has allowed them to evolve incredible technology, including allowing them to live hundreds and hundreds of years. This interests Dr. Ivans very much. Unfortunately, I said there's good news and bad news. Well, the bad news is that the aliens soon discover that human beings are very much warlike, and they can't deal with it. They can't take it. And after much discussion, they decide to leave. Their initial plan is to wipe the brain of all the human survivors. They'll just return them to civilization and they'll never know what happened. But Dr. Ivans pleads. He says, this is too big of an event. This is a epoch-shattering event, epoch-making event. You're all about longevity. I'm all about longevity. I need to remember this. And he makes a promise. The aliens agree, but he has to promise to keep his silence. He has to promise to never tell anyone on Earth, including his wife, whose memory will be wiped. And he agrees to this. Once he returns, he finds that he can't adjust. He has an incredible hard time adjusting to life on Earth. With that knowledge he has, his life no longer has any meaning. And while he is helped by the fact that one alien, a young 60-year-old alien he likes very much, has decided to stay, the other bad news is that the Secret Service is after him. So he can't cope, and he's being chased by essentially the CIA, like dozens of agents who are after his secret. So it's looking worse and worse for Dr. Ivans. Will he be able to keep his silence? What happens if he does? What happens if he doesn't? All these questions and many more await you if you watch Silence of Dr. Ivans. It is worth it. It is great. It was very hard to find a copy. It was very hard to watch for a long time, but if you do find a copy, you might find one in perhaps some astute searching on the internet will allow you to find a copy. It's excellent. One of the best science fiction movies from the USSR I've seen so far. Why is it so good? Well, mainly for three reasons. It's a great story, the visuals are super, and the lead actor is fantastic. So let's start with the visuals. In many ways, the film looks like a Brian De Palma movie. In certain instances, at least, it has that very, like, that deep focus effect that you see in many De Palma movies or some Coppola movies. You might see that, I think. Like with a face in the foreground and another person in the background, but they're both in focus. That type of very impressive shot. You also have plenty of cool camera movements. It's very well directed in general. It's not showy, but there are some noticeable director choices. It's more in the vein of a De Palma than a filmmaker who's trying to be more like a Howard Hawks or a John Ford, and like a director who is trying to not show off. So this is more like a visually extravagant movie, but it's still in very, very good taste. So visually it looks great. The other aspect, it has these very uniquely Soviet characteristics. So there are two things in that movie which I have seen in many Soviet movies. One of them is the use of the mix of color and black and white. Sequences in black and white, sequences in color. You have it in the Tarkovsky movies, for instance. And when I started watching Tarkovsky movies, that really seemed very odd to me. But once I really started watching more Soviet movies, I saw that was not that uncommon in Soviet cinema. And you have that here, and it works great. The black and white sequences are mostly used once they've crashed, like in the cockpit. It's very tastefully done. It's very interesting, and I've grown to like that effect very much. One other aspect, which is very typically Soviet, which I have again grown to love, is the special effects. Now, obviously, the special effects in Soviet movies are relatively primitive in a sense. There's no CGI involved, obviously. There's no big extravagant Douglas Trumbull 2001 Star Wars effects. None of that. We're closer to the Doctor Who aesthetic, like the 70s Doctor Who aesthetic, than the Star Wars aesthetic. But I still think the effects work very well. There's a specific type of Soviet special effect which I've only seen in their movies. It's this sort of like flowing liquid space effect, like imagine a nebula, like a moving nebula, like more or less like the nebula in Star Trek 2, like the regular one, I think, nebula. Well, you have these floating, I don't know. It's very hard to describe. They use that, like these very flowing, I'm guessing they're shooting liquids, like colored liquids in other liquids, and the liquids have different densities, like maybe colored milk and, and what, it looks like something like that. But it looks great. It's very science fiction. It's very spacey. And so they use that and they mix that with, lots of superpositions and camera tricks. You can tell that you're watching camera tricks. You can tell the type of effect. Again, it's a different comparison, but if you watch 70s Doctor Who and they're walking in caves, but it's obviously there's a camera trick going on. You can tell it's an effect, but it still works very well. And as I said, I've grown very, very fond of that aesthetic. It really has a cachet, it has a personality, it has style, it has creativity, it has all these things. So we're kind of conditioned, whatever the country is, the film is from, we're kind of conditioned. We've been told all our lives that we must laugh at special effects that are not up to today's standards. And nay, I say. No, that's total no. Let us marvel at the creativity of these people who had a shoestring and a bowl of whatever it is, and they created these worlds with nothing. With just, with a make-do attitude and like searching their heads, and they created something beautiful with that. So yeah, it looks like a sort of cheap effect, but I guess it's very impressive, looks beautiful, I love it, it's great, and the way it's done in this movie is very effective. And all that is in service of a great story. And this is a philosophical science fiction movie. Like many movies purport to be philosophical, but this is the heart of the movie. The heart of the movie is we're raising philosophical, moral, ethical issues, especially in the first third, and we'll talk about them a lot, but it's still interesting. It's not, it's not boring and all of these, just these people talking, but still there's a lot of philosophical, ethical conversations. Main philosophical conversations take place in the first third with the aliens. For the following 2/3, we're seeing the repercussions of those questions playing out. I mean, Jean-Paul Sartre did that, right? So it's a literarily recognized method. I mean, it's interesting. It's done very well here. I have to admit that I liked the first part best, because on top of the philosophical discussions, there's also a deep sense of mystery when there's the plane crash and how it happens, how they survive. It very much reminded me of Goke Body Snatcher from Hell. It has that kind of vibe, and it's obviously Goke Body Snatcher from Hell is a plane crash, mysterious plane crash on an island, and an alien is involved. In Body Snatcher from Hell, it's an evil alien. Here we have good aliens, but still there are many similarities in the beginning, and the vibe is kind of comparable. So that whole part is very efficient, very cool, very good. The mystery works, and when they land all the strange, phenomenon, a little bit, it's not like Cube, with the people trapped in the cubes within cubes, but it has kind of that strange feeling of, I've been trapped in this strange environment where the laws of time and physics don't seem to apply anymore. What's happening? What's going on? It's very good. It's very interesting. Very well done. Once Dr. Ivan returns, the story is still good, but I still prefer the mystery of the first part, because the second part is mostly he can't adapt. Like the second third is he can't adapt. He's in contact with the girl alien, so his wife thinks he's either talking to himself and therefore going crazy, or he's having an affair, which is not good for her. She's not happy about that, obviously. So there's kind of that going on. And the last third is where we mainly see the Secret Service. And the Secret Service stuff, it works pretty well. It's pretty good. And overall, the story is good, and it's interesting to see how this guy has basically found himself, like he was a Nobel level scientist. He finds now that his life's work actually has no meaning because he's seen what the aliens can do, so he's like, I'm working with crayons here, right? So it is interesting, but I still prefer the first third. And you might be saying to yourself, evil Secret Service from the West, or they have a space federation, and isn't that like communist propaganda? Well, I hear you, my friends. And that's a valid question. We'll be talking about that in just a minute or two. But the third reason why it's very good is that the lead actor is, as I said earlier, the lead actor is fantastic. And he really impressed me. And seeing on the picture this guy, this old guy with a mustache. The Russian people who might be watching me right now are probably throwing fits. I'm pulling their hair out because the way I'm talking about this guy, because this man is Sergei Bondarchuk, and he's a legend. He is a monumental figure in Soviet cinema. He directed War and Peace, like 4 hours. I think it won an Oscar for Best Foreign Movie. He directed Waterloo, and it's either for War and Peace or Waterloo that he actually recreated the Napoleonic battles to scale, like the actual numbers of soldiers, and I don't know if he reproduced all the maneuvers, but he went to great lengths to make these movies, immense epics. I'm very curious to see them, but that doesn't make him a good actor. And nor is the fact that in the West he's mostly known for being the father of Natalia Bondarchuk, who you might remember from a little movie called Solaris. Yeah, so Harry, the girl, she's played by Natalia wonderfully. played by Natalia Bondarchuk. Well, her father is this guy, Sergei Bondarchuk. And as I said, I wasn't expecting much. He's played in a lot of movies, like over 46, I think, according to IMDb. He's played in a lot of movies, but, you know, I wasn't expecting anything, and he's formidable. He's very expressive, but he's also very subtle. You know, he never overplays, but he conveys a lot of emotion, a lot of depth, a lot of thought. And I was very impressed by that. Very impressed by the way that he really, you know, showed on the screen the torment of this guy. And as I said, that part of the movie I didn't respond to as much. I thought I like the alien mystery better than the can't cope with normal life part. But he's excellent. He's great. He's fantastic in that part. Very impressive, Sergei Bondarchuk, and he does carry the movie ultimately. So a great surprise. I was very happy to see the movie. It's hard to find, I said once again. It was hard certainly for a long time to find a copy, but it was worth it. It's excellent. It's great. I love it. See it. Watch it. So what about that propaganda question? I noted down some thoughts. Here they are. Silence of Dr. Ivans is a philosophical science fiction movie. That is to say, it deliberately raises philosophical, ethical, and moral questions and explores them throughout its dialogue and narrative. These issues form the core of the movie. Western viewers will almost inevitably see it as propaganda. But is it? We are conditioned to see Eastern movies as either communist propaganda or anti-communist subversion. Watching the movies themselves shows that this is at best a gross oversimplification. However, the propaganda question does matter, especially in a philosophical discussion. Propaganda is a form of manipulation. Though it often hides in plain sight, it is still hiding. There is a disparity between the outer message and the inner intention. I am showing you one thing to make you accept this other thing. Like Neil Young said, you pay for this and they give you that. It is a form of dishonesty, of deception, of bad faith. These are huge problems in a philosophical context. How can you have a discussion about ethics with someone who, in the very argument he is putting forth, is being unethical? If I have reason to believe there is some deception involved in what I'm being told, then it does not matter how sound the arguments are. Before I let them possibly change my mind, I have to make sure just what it is I am allowing in there. If I am to accept the message, I have to reassure myself that the messenger is trustworthy. That is basic sanity. But this cuts both ways. If I am trying to determine the good faith of my interlocutor, then I in return must do so in good faith. I cannot pass judgment on my opposite's insincerity from a place of insincerity. That is, of course, if things like truth and ethics actually matter to me. Perhaps I only care about winning, about being right. Perhaps power, not justice, is what matters to me. Perhaps I am in bad faith. Is that good or bad? Well, that is an ethical question, which only makes sense to have if I am in good faith. If I am not, and many people make that choice, then I should at least make sure I am aware of it. Bad faith, after all, is self-deception. It is lying to another but convincing yourself you believe that lie. This is often very effective in the short term, but always makes things infinitely worse in the long term. All empires are built on bad faith. The countless crises they must manage are after effects of their bad faith. When ultimately the empire collapses, as all empires must, it is from the weight of its own bad faith. This is why all empires fall. Calling your empire something else will not change that fact. Still, at least in our individual lives, good faith or bad faith is a matter of personal choice. Let's presume, however, that good faith does matter to me, that the issues I say I care about actually matter to me, that my values are not something I preach to others or chastise about, but actual principles that guide my actions, my choices, my daily life. That my intention is not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. This should not make me blind, naive, or stupid. These are in fact precisely what I aim to avoid. The intent is to open our minds, not close our eyes. There is dishonesty in this world. We must not fool ourselves. That is what makes this question so difficult. In the case of a movie, I am therefore left with two questions. Is the message in front of me expressed in good faith? Is it being honest? And two, am I hearing it, receiving it in good faith? Am I being honest? To say a movie is propaganda is to answer these questions categorically. No, the movie is certainly not honest. Yes, I am certainly honest. This reassures us. It gives us a good feeling. Certainty makes us feel safe. Human beings long for safety. It is programmed in our bodies. Stay alive. Stay safe. Certainty is safety. But certainty is a feeling of biological safety. It has nothing to do with truth. Some truths, once discovered, may provide a sense of certainty. So can many untruths. Humans were once certain that the Earth was the center of the universe. Was that true? People were killed when they said otherwise. They were seen as a threat. In a way, they were a threat. But who was right, who was wrong? Who was in the truth? Killing someone who threatens our certainties does not make them true, nor does any other punishment. This is why feeling threatened in our certainties is a good thing. It does not mean that my beliefs are wrong, in whole or in part, but it clearly signals that they are beliefs, not truths. That what I took for a truth was, at least in part, just a belief. Beliefs do not keep us safe. They just give us that feeling. If a belief gives me a sense of safety, but it is in fact not true, then how safe is it really making me? When we read a book or watch a movie, only noticing what strengthens our beliefs, while ignoring everything that doesn't, then we're not looking for truth. We're looking for safety, and we cannot find it that way. So how do we look for truth? How can we tell if the movie is complete propaganda, partial propaganda, if it's right, if it's not, if it's honest? In a movie, it will go something like the following 5 questions. What's being told explicitly? What is the explicit story of the movie? What are the implicit messages? What is the unspoken real-life context? how confident am I that everyone involved, director, screenwriter, producers, are in good faith? And finally, how confident am I that I am answering in good faith? These 5 questions are our method. They are our framework. They are our battle plan. Remember, the enemy is not out there. It is our complacency, our own intellectual laziness, our own moral hypocrisy. These are our enemies. If we do have outer enemies, these are the weaknesses they will exploit. But anyone blinded by certainty already has all the enemies they need inside them. So let's take silence of Dr. Ivans and very quickly go through our 5 questions. What's being told explicitly? Well, as we mentioned, we have aliens, they visit Earth, they have this federation, and there are 2 races. The thing is that the 2 races, the movie tells this explicitly. The humans in particular have given up some freedoms, some autonomy in order to establish this kind of federation with the aliens. And this has allowed them to live in peace, and this has allowed them to develop this prodigious science which allows them to live 200, 300 years. They can travel across the universe because they have established this relationship with the aliens. And the aliens, they're really different from us. Like, that effect is very cool, by the way. And when they, being like the humans and the aliens from across the universe, tell this to the humans, many humans are horrified, and a big part of the conversations in the movie are, should we give some freedoms in order to have this progress, this science? And the movie is on the side of, obviously, yes, we can, yes, we should, but there are a lot of nuances, and the movie does tell us that, in fact, no real freedoms were abandoned. It just sort of looks that way from a certain angle. But certainly when I watched the movie, I got the feeling that this did sound like, it sounded like the justification of a country that has conquered another country and that says, now we're friends and equals, and isn't everything great? Like in real life, like in Canada, actually. This is the actual situation in Canada. This rang some alarm bells in my mind. But as I said, when you watch the actual movie, I don't think it's propaganda. I didn't see the hand of the state trying to tell me something. But all that actually is reading into the implicit message, because the explicit message here is that giving up some autonomy is good for everyone if it's mutually beneficial. The explicit message is, it's great, you get this fantastic science and you live for hundreds of years. But what is the implicit message? Well, is it this justification of, let's say, an aggressive foreign policy? But if it is, and I, as a Western watcher, am watching this, what it also reminds me is the discourse from America, yes? Like the expression aggressive foreign policy comes from them. The idea that we're all equal, but some are more equal than others, doesn't just apply to the Eastern Bloc. Yes, in the West, everyone is equal, but the U.S. is more equal than all the other countries. Also, I couldn't help but think about Farewell to the Master, the short story that inspired Day the Earth Stood Still. If you've read it, you know that that short story expresses the exact same idea, that human beings give up some freedom in order to have peace, safety, progress, and so forth. In the movie, it's not that evident, but in the short story, that's the punch of the story. So what does that tell us? It tells us that it's tricky to say it's propaganda just based on that. Even if we're not thinking about the American foreign policy and all these questions, if we're just going by the literature, Well, there's this short story, and it's saying exactly the same thing and kind of raising the same question. So, Farewell to the Master. That might also be an indication that it was just a question floating in the like world culture. It's a question like that people were asking themselves in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was in the air, it was part of the zeitgeist. So it might be a form of self-justification by a dominant power over a vassal state. It might be a form of apology of that, but it might also be something else entirely. Or it could be all these things. While this theme in the movie raises the question, is it propaganda? It doesn't offer a clear answer. That in itself is not sufficient to say that is propaganda. We might also think that a more obvious implicit message is the West is bad because there's the CIA and it's in the West and the secret agents and they're obviously evil the way I talked about it. But actually, if you watch the movie, it's a lot more subtle than that. They're basically not shown as really evil. And even the West is not evil. And that's very frequent in Soviet movies. They do not treat the West like the West treats the Soviets in their movies. It's not the same. In the West, the communists are evil, but in the Soviet movies, it's usually not that. It does not mean it's not propaganda. It does not mean they're not trying to sell you something, but if they are, it's not that. It's not demonization. What they're usually saying is that we should all live in peace, and as in the case here, well, there's a Western jet fighter. He shoots at the aliens. The aliens are horrified, and Dr. Ivan says, well, he must have thought you were Russians, you were from the USSR. The aliens say, well, why should they fight the Soviets? And you might think he's going to say this big speech about a justification of the USSR, but he doesn't. He's basically saying there's this ideology on both sides and this conflict and humans are divided and please forgive all of them. You see? So he's not condemning even the soldiers fighting the Soviets. And again, that might be a subtle form. Implicitly, this is all implicit, and this is what makes it hard to say if it is propaganda or it isn't, but it might be a sort of subtle way of saying, or not so subtle way of saying, workers of all party unite, throw down your chains, so they might be saying, yes, your leaders are trying to deceive you by saying we're enemies, but we're actually friendly. How much of that is propaganda and how much of that is a sincere attempt at friendship? Well, we say it's propaganda because we say the communists are evil. What we can determine for now is that it's not sufficient based on that implicit message to say if it is propaganda or not. We need real life context. And that's our third question. What is the unspoken real life context? Well, the main context, obviously, is that this is a movie made during the Cold War, East versus West. In the east corner, the USSR, its satellite states, the Warsaw Pact. In the west corner, the USA, its satellite states, which it doesn't call that, but that is what they are. And NATO. The Western narrative is that the USSR is evil. Communism, as a whole, is evil incarnate. In movies like Red Planet Mars, for instance, in the 50s, the communist agent is presented as a downright Satanist. The name Satan is employed at the end. And Christ sends a personal voice message, the actual Christ, an actual voice message from Mars, blessing freedom, democracy, and essentially the free market system. You never have that in Soviet movies. So this is where we hit our first stumbling block, because if we have such a monolithic position, like communism is evil, it comes from the depths of hell. It's evil, radical evil. Such a position implies total adherence or total rejection. Either one is working for Satan or one isn't. There isn't a lot of middle ground if your enemy belongs to the hordes of hell. Taken at face value, the anti-Soviet message is such a caricature that it seems impossible to take it seriously. Yet it is still a core element of Western political thought and narrative to this day. It has the value of absolute certainty, but that does not make it true. All it says is that that belief makes us feel safe. In fact, the Western portrayal of the evils of communism is so absurdly hyperbolic that it is impossible not to find flaws in it. As is the notion that the USA are a shining beacon of liberty. American-backed coups come to mind. Banana republics, Guantanamo Bay, US-backed death squads, and so forth. Because the Western narrative requires total adherence, many opt instead for total rejection. They might conclude, therefore, that everything that comes from the USA or even Western civilization, and both are presented as the same thing, which they aren't. So they might conclude that everything that comes from the US or Western civilization is evil incarnate, and thus that all its enemies are on the side of the angels. This does a lot to explain, for instance, why so many Western intellectuals in the 30s ended up defending the Soviet show trials. Other examples may come to mind. But it is still the same narrative, the same caricature, only with the roles reversed. The truth here is that the context, the real-life context that would allow us to know if the movie is propaganda or not, this context is infinitely complex. Communism and anti-communism go back at least to the French Revolution. It is directly linked to the emergence of the British Empire, which is inseparable to that of capitalism. There can be no capitalism without imperialism, then or now. And there can be no democracy, as we know it, without capitalism, without empire, without all the crimes that means. Democracy, capitalism, imperialism are all aspects of the same phenomenon. It is therefore not just a question of passing broad moral judgments, of using words like freedom and liberty. Words only make sense in a given context, and the context of the last 300 years makes no one look good. This does not mean that everyone is equally guilty. But how do we know how much each side has to bear that guilt? How do we know which side is more guilty or less guilty? Modern empires are built on narratives, much of which rely on blurring the truth. Even a lifetime of serious, dedicated research will not uncover the whole picture. Simply put, we usually don't know enough, no matter what we think, to understand what's going on. We don't. Part of the context for this movie, if one is serious, would involve at least a basic understanding of Soviet doctrines. The point of view of the movie is Marxist, along the lines of historical materialism. And we hear that all the time, but what does it actually mean? Well, in short, we could say that it means that, like, the idea of historical materialism is that societies progress according to the evolution of how things are made. of the means of production, and how that affects the economy. So societies progress according to the evolution of the means of production. This is, according to the Marxist theory, a natural phenomenon, a natural law. And for that reason, the evolution from capitalism to a form of communism is inevitable. Also because there are some economic reasons, but it's a law of nature, according to this theory, that capitalism must give way to communism, not because capitalists are inherently evil, which they are not, but because they are trying to maintain a system that is destined to replace because of evolution, of the means of production, of technological enhancement. Capitalists are not inherently evil, but they are trying to maintain a system that is destined to be replaced. So that's the basic idea. And the movie does not say most of these things outright, or any of these things really. It doesn't say them, but it illustrates them throughout. Does that make it propaganda? Note here that the question is not, is the ideology right or wrong? That's another question. The question is, are the creators making a good faith attempt at making a heartfelt point, a philosophical point? Are they sincere? They might be wrong, but are they sincere? Are they in good faith? Are they making a sales pitch, or are they trying to express something which they want me to understand on a human level? If they are not sincere, I can disregard the message, or I can enjoy the pretty pictures. But if they are sincere and I ignore them for ideological reasons, for my own ideological reasons, then I am choosing beliefs over truth. I am failing in my own ethical commitment. I am not obligated to change my mind, but I must listen with good faith before I pass judgment. So how confident am I that everyone involved is in good faith? That's our fourth question of 5. The directors, the screenwriter, in this case here it's the same guy, the producers, in this case it's an office of the Soviet government, but even then, in terms of context, we need to go see the relationships, because it's not, it's complex. The relationship between like the Bureau of Propaganda or Cinema, like the movie producers in the USSR, and the government. What was it really like? Okay. Are these people sincere? Or are they under orders to deliver a specific message, to sell something? Again, it's very hard to tell. We would need to research the history of this specific film in great detail to be sure. Like the discussions during the production, how the director came up with the idea, context. We would need, as I mentioned a second ago, a thorough understanding of how Soviet propaganda actually worked on a day-to-day basis. I just mentioned that a second ago. The USSR of 1973 was not Stalinism. Its propaganda department, and it had one, but its propaganda department was not that of Joseph Goebbels, or Hollywood for that matter. So what's going on in the movie? Well, a likely hypothesis, the most likely hypothesis, in fact, is that exactly like in the West, some people believe in what we would call the state ideology, not because they're brainwashed, but because they respond to the noble aspirations any ideology relies on. That's how they hook us. There may be some bad faith involved, some willful ignorance, the turning of a blind eye. But is there more than in the West? In the case of Silence of Dr. Ivans, I don't think so. How confident am I that I am answering in good faith? That's our fifth and final question of our method. That is the most crucial question. Am I blinded by unconscious beliefs? Am I too eager to believe or to condemn? Am I fully acting in accordance with the dictates of my conscience? These are not questions for others to answer. But it is my duty as a human being to do so for myself, and to not rest until I have attained not the comfort of certainty, but that infinitely deeper source of inner safety, a sense of integrity. So these were my thoughts on Silence of Dr. Ivans. If you watch it, do let me know what you thought. I'm curious to find out. That sense of integrity is the most precious thing we have. That sense of being true to ourselves, and we're constantly under pressure to not listen to it, to even think it's bad. And very often we get lost in our lives, and we can get lost for a very long time. So if that's you, I have a coaching service. I wanted to be a rock star, but I'm not. I feel lost. What's my calling? All these things. This sort of question, deep existential questions. If you're curious, just drop me a line, and I'll be happy. We'll talk. But for now, Silence of Dr. Ivans is a fantastic film. I liked it a lot, and it looks great. Story is great. Lead actor is fantastic. So it's comes with, once again, my highest recommendation, and hope you can find a copy. And for now, until then, see you later. Keep watching the sky.